2018 meeting of the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs. Today, appearing before us in the first hour, we have the Honorable Seamus O'Regan, the Minister of Veterans Affairs. And we have with him General Walt Natichek, the Deputy Minister. Gentlemen, welcome. You have the floor at the start of the meeting. Members, we are going to go to 5-minute rounds all the way around because time is limited, as you know. And also on that point, I would ask members to keep their questions concise, clear, and as put forth in a straightforward manner. And I'd ask the witnesses to do the same so that we can get as many questions as possible in. Minister O'Regan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, and to all the members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today to discuss the 2018-2019 supplementary estimates. At this midpoint in the fiscal year, we are seeking a 1.2% increase in our funding. The majority of this is related to readying ourselves to implement the return of a lifelong pension, which I announced last December. As you know, starting on April 1st, 2019, veterans with service-related illness or injury will have the option of a tax-free monthly pension for life. As had been requested by our veterans and stakeholders, Pension for Life includes recognition and compensation for the pain and suffering as a result of a service-related illness or injury. Now, I want to take a moment here to clear up a key misunderstanding. The new pain and suffering compensation under Pension for Life is not simply the former disability award split up on a monthly basis. Not anywhere close, actually. When taken as a monthly benefit, the pain and suffering compensation offers up to a maximum of $1,150 per month for life. And for a seriously disabled 25-year-old veteran who lives to the age of 75, they would stand to receive $690,000 in pain and suffering compensation alone, well above the current disability award of $360,000. Le programme Pension à vie comprend aussi
Pension for Life includes additional compensation for those most seriously injured and income replacement of 90% of a veteran's pre-release salary for as long as they need it while in rehabilitation or permanently and severely disabled. Whether they serve only for a short time or have a full career, members of the Canadian Armed Forces will eventually release from the military. And it's our job to help them transition smoothly and successfully to reestablish in life after service and to commemorate and recognize the service of all of those who have served.
93% of all Veterans Affairs expenditures goes directly to programs and benefits for veterans and their families. 93%. This includes health and well-being benefits, transition to civilian life programs, and supports for families. On top of that, over the last 3 years, we have significantly increased the support for veterans. For example, in 2017, the maximum disability award rose from $314,000 to $360,000, indexed to inflation. This alone meant approximately $700 million for more than 67,000 veterans who had already received a disability award. You may note, actually, that there appears in this year's estimates a slight decrease over last year. This is due directly to the amount we dispersed topping up veterans with $700 million in disability awards. Even if we hold that one-time payment off to one side, we are still providing more direct benefits to veterans than ever before. We also increased the earnings loss benefit to 90% of a veteran's index salary at time of release, previously set at 75%. We have also increased supports for families. On April 1st of this year, we introduced the Caregiver Recognition Benefit, a benefit that offers $1,000 a month tax-free, indexed annually, which is paid directly to the person who cares for an injured veteran. We also know that the transition from Canadian Armed Forces member to veteran must always include their families. So we have ensured access to the Veteran Family Program at all 32 military family resource centers for veterans who release medically and their families. This helps them establish successfully in their new community while retaining their connection to the military community. For members with complex needs, for example, those transitioning for medical reasons, a case manager will help coordinate transition planning with the Canadian Armed Forces side by side with Veterans Affairs Canada. Case managers can also refer veterans and their families to a network of 4,000 mental health professionals. Veterans and family members can receive assistance through our 24-hour toll-free helpline with access to psychological counseling and other services. On top of that, for veterans with a service-related illness or injury, there is a range of physical and mental health services available to them. A network of 11 operational stress injury clinics and satellite service sites across the country delivers services where veterans need them. We can also provide access to mental health services for a veteran's family member if it can be shown that it would help the veteran achieve their rehabilitation goals. But let me be clear. Treatment benefits will not be provided by Veterans Affairs if that family member is under the care or custody of a federal institution or correctional facility. For veterans looking for a career after their military service, we offer qualified career counselors to advise about labor markets, help prepare a resume, and give job search training. And in some cases, they can help a veteran find a job. We also offer veterans access to funding for tuition at colleges and universities or professional training. Those with at least 6 years of service can be eligible for up to $40,000. Veterans with more than 12 years of service can receive up to $80,000. Since April, when we introduced this education and training benefit, over 1,600 veterans since April have been approved to get the education and training that they want to improve their post-service lives. I'd also like to take a moment now to discuss the new Veterans Emergency Fund. Established April of this year, the fund allows Veterans Affairs to provide emergency financial support to veterans, their families, and survivors whose well-being is at risk due to an urgent and unexpected situation. The emergency fund is intended to ensure short-term relief while we work to identify long-term needs and provide solutions through our other programs and benefits. To date, we have spent over $600,000 to assist veterans and their families in emergency situations. We also introduced the $3 million Veteran Wellbeing Fund because we know there is an incredible amount of community interest in supporting Canada's veterans. I recently announced the first 21 recipients of this fund, which supports private, public, or academic organizations in conducting research and implementing initiatives and projects that support the well-being of veterans and their families. These organizations are tackling complex issues from veterans' homelessness and transitioning out of the military to mental health and physical rehabilitation. Au cours de la dernière année, j'ai organisé
Over the past year, I have hosted 45 town halls, roundtables, and summits. I've met with many veterans, their families, and their advocates across this country. I met with over 65 organizations during the Roundtable on Homelessness in June and a national summit in Ottawa this October. Veterans Affairs staff have also held more than 100 outreach activities across the country. One result of this increased engagement with the veteran community is that veterans and families are more aware of the benefits and services they're eligible for. Over the past 2 years, we have seen a 32% increase in the number of applications for disability benefits.
We've heard what they have to say, and we are acting on what we have heard. One of the things that we heard from veterans was the need to expand the medical expense tax credit to recognize the costs for psychiatric service dogs. And starting this tax year, they can now do that. We also funded a pilot study to evaluate the effectiveness of using service dogs to assist veterans with PTSD. Veterans also told us they want a tangible connection with the veteran community and a symbol of recognition of their service. We brought back the Veteran Service Card, now open to more veterans than ever before. We are increasing our capacity to deliver services. We reopened the 9 field offices that had been closed. We opened a new one. We increased outreach and hired significantly more staff, including more case managers. Cette année, nous avons investi 42 millions.
This year, we invested $42 million to eliminate the backlog of applications over 16 weeks. And we will have a new wait time tool so that veterans can see the average processing time for programs and services. We all know that Canadians value the contribution and sacrifice of veterans and all those who died in service to our country. That's why remembrance plays such an important role in what we do. As a Minister of Veterans Affairs, I have participated in commemorations that have been significant and moving. We have marked important milestones such as centennials of events in the First World War and the 65th anniversary of the Korean War armistice. Over the next 2 years, we will mark the 75th anniversary at the end of the Second World War.
Veteran and family member receives the benefits and services they're eligible for, no matter how they come forward for them. No veteran should ever be turned away from the benefits and services they are entitled to through their service. And with the right resources in place, we can move forward toward our common goal of providing the care, support, and respect that Canada's veterans deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. You're under time, actually. I didn't need to give you that 1-minute warning. Mr. Kitchen, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Minister and General. Thank you for being here today. Minister, you talked about the backlog, and according to the figures that your government's released to the CBC as of November 30th, there were 3,356 veterans whose claims have taken more than a year to be put through the system. That's an increase from the 3,110 cases in the last budget year. So for $42 million that you're spending, what are you getting from that? You're actually going up in numbers of backlogs, not going down.
I thank the honourable member for the question. We have to do better. There's no question about it. Wait times are bigger. What's interesting, though, is the number of actual veterans who are being processed is bigger as well. As I said in my opening statement, we have seen a 32% increase since 2015 in applications. And 60% of those, very interestingly, are for the first time. And we know that many of these are veterans who, frankly, had given up on the system. They've given up on a culture that had consistently said no to them, and now a culture that more consistently says yes. So we have got a large number of people who have come on board looking for services. As the General keeps reminding me, that is a good thing. And indeed it is, because it means that more people are putting up their hands and asking for help. The $42 million, which we got in the last budget, is meant to help us play catch-up. One of the significant problems we have, and we are literally hiring people as fast as we possibly can through the system that we have in the federal government, but is finding the qualified people. It's easy to lose them. It's easy to fire them. It is far harder to gain them back. A lot of these people are in demand. They're bilingual, and they have very specific training for the task. So, hiring back has taken more time than we had hoped.
Thank you. So further to the backlog, two constituents come to mind to me. One young gentleman who's 28 years old, I coached him in hockey, and he stepped up and stepped up to represent our country, not only here in Canada, but in Afghanistan. And that gentleman, we just found out last week, or actually 2 days ago, was the fact that he's finally got his disability claim. And it was 63 weeks. Not 16, but 63 weeks. Now, the second constituent, who's been waiting for over a year, in fact, his paperwork was in place as of December 14th of last year. And he was told that the department is working on files from June of 2017, so a year ago. So even if things progress quickly, he's going to be a year on the 14th. And let's say it's 6 months to get to where he is. He's still even a year and a half to get to where he is. Now, this young gentleman, unfortunately, had a mental health crisis. And so he phoned the assistance line because he was given that by a caseworker. The assistant line basically says, "We're not here to help you." Now, he was fortunate to have friends and family that talked him off of that cliff. But he has 6 other colleagues that were in his platoon that have committed suicide. Those people, if they called that line and didn't get that assistance, how is that acceptable to this department?
It's not acceptable to this department. We continue to put more money and more resources into making sure that situations like that, sir, do not happen. Maybe, Walt, do you want to get into the minutiae of it?
Yeah, and sir, thank you very much for the question. And indeed, every time a veteran comes forward and needs help, we need to provide that help as quickly as we can. When we drill down on the 3,000 men and women who have made applications, and we try to figure out why this takes so long, in some cases it's because when the application came in the first time, we didn't have all the information. We have to go back to the veteran and say, please give us this, give us that. And then go to the Canadian Armed Forces and say, if the file is there, can we have the file, or the Library and Archives, and ask for the file and put it all together in order to land it. What we have tried to do is make the decision-making a lot faster in the department. So, for example, once we have all the information for mental health, we've changed it, tried to streamline it So now we know that we're approving over 90% of all applications for mental health.
Excuse me for interrupting, General, but I'm talking about this assistance line. This assistance line, and I'll quote, "The VAC delivers a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week VAC assistance service, 1-800-268-7708, or TDD 1-800-567-5803. This is a confidential counseling and referral service delivered through a nationwide team of mental health professionals." If that's what this is supposed to be, and this gentleman phoned and didn't get a mental health professional to be there, how can you sit there and say that this is acceptable? It's not. You're saying something and you're not providing that service. You are not helping our veterans or our soldiers in these situations.
I'll have to ask you to respond to that after we're at the time limit. Mr. Olofsson, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, General, for coming. Good to see you again. As you're aware, over the last couple of weeks, we started a study on veterans' homelessness. I had initiated this study. Now, we have a number of initiatives that the government has started as a whole outside Veterans Affairs. There's the National Housing Strategy and health transfers to the provinces that dedicates spending on mental health services, which, as we know, is a big issue for veterans. We also know there are new programs from Veterans Affairs, the Family Wellbeing Fund, Center of Excellence on PTSD, and the Veterans Emergency Fund. So could you summarize how these programs together are helping improve the lives of veterans?
There are a number of things that combined together we're really hoping is going to help us crack the problem of homelessness. We had a full national roundtable on homelessness with some of the best groups in the country, right across the country, some of them regional, some of them national in scope. And it was heartening for me just to see them sharing best practice with one another, sharing business cards with one another. There are some things that are going on in some parts of the country that are proving to be remarkably effective. And what we're able to do now with the Wellness Fund is help basically to ramp them up so that they'll be able to help out more people in the region, or possibly be able to scope things a little more nationally. So, I say that to say that while we are doing many things, the issue of homelessness, and I think anybody involved in the field would agree with this, is something that we have to tackle with groups who are close to the ground. And I'm proud of the fact that we do that, whether it's, Vets Canada or any number of organizations that exist across the country. The Legion is doing incredible work on this, and there's, again, some very small regionally based ones that are doing great work. Pension for Life, because it's a monthly contact with veterans, is going to prove to be, I think, a very important tool. Because instead of getting a disability award and basically been written off the ledger, we will now have the ability to have monthly contact with the veteran and be able to basically check in with them more frequently than we can now. That's going to prove to be, I think, but other things like the earnings loss benefit and the psychosocial vocational rehabilitation that comes with that. The fact that many veterans now will be receiving 90% of their pre-release salary, the fact that we can offer career transition services that are more than just $1,000 and good luck with the job search, but we are proactively able to work with them, and we're also able to match them up with private sector hiring. All of that combined, I think, is going to go a long way to helping solve that problem of homelessness. But what I'm most heartened by, again, is just listening to groups from across the country who are now working together.
Can I just add that one of the key parts about preventing homelessness is actually preemptive, and that is overcoming the stigma of mental injuries, mental health injuries. And that's why we've taken on a much more presumptive approach to mental health disability claims, working with the Canadian Armed Forces to work upstream while folks are still in uniform if they are struggling, to ensure that they seek help while they're still in the Canadian Armed Forces, so we actually know about their situation as they transition into civil society in Canada, in order to prevent that sense of hopelessness, where they lose their sense of purpose and get into a situation. But then, as the Minister said, working with communities across the country, and indeed with veteran networks, because folks know where their battle buddies are, going to Mr. Kitchen's point, that it's battle buddies, shipmates, squadron mates who are keeping tabs on each other and hopefully intervening early enough before someone gets to that point. And I would also want to reinforce the same point with Royal Canadian Mounted Police, for whom we provide some support. And those networks are so important, But also then, with regard to this emergency fund, the very fact that we can now offer for the first time emergency funds to an individual without having to prove their total situation or eligibility. When I talk to the case managers across the country, what they said is not only is it good in the case of the emergency, but the fact is it's bringing veterans in the door. Veterans who would not otherwise come in are coming in the door and saying, I have a need, and then as we drill down, we find out that folks are actually eligible for much, much more.
You have 15 seconds, sir.
Okay, that's just enough time to say thank you very much.
Mr. Johns, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, General, for being here. In the 2018-2019 estimates, you asked Parliament to authorize expenditures not exceeding $4,363,061,570, which is $297 million, 6.4% less than you requested in the previous fiscal year. And we know there's a tremendous backlog of applications for nearly every program administered by Veterans Affairs Canada. You're missing half of your own targets, including applications for the rehabilitation program, which is backlogged, applications for the long-term care program, backlogged, the career transition program, backlogged, the earnings loss benefit backlogged, the war veterans allowance is backlogged, and of course the monster backlog in the processing of applications for disability benefits. 3,000 plus are waiting for more than a year, as my friend Mr. Kitchen outlined, to get the help they need. Well, your own target is to process these applications in just 16 weeks. And so given these backlogs and the lack of basic services for veterans and their families, why did your department actually request less money from the Treasury this year than last? And shouldn't you be asking the Treasury for more money overall until these application backlogs are finally cleared?
Well, I mean, as the honourable member knows, and we had, I think, a very healthy discussion on lapse funding in the House of Commons. First of all, it's very important to remember that 93% of our budget goes directly to veterans, either right directly into their pockets or into benefits and services for which they deserve. Much of what we distribute in terms of money that goes into people's pockets is quasi-statutory, which means whether or not it's, as you know, whether or not it's 10 veterans who raise their hand in any given year or 10,000, we will always have that money ready for them. And any money that we see at the end of the year that's a little more than we had budgeted for, a little less than we had budgeted for, immediately goes back into the following year. I would contest the issue of wait times, and this gets back to Mr. Kitchen's point. There is, and this is not to take away from our impatience on this, but there is, unfortunately, when you put even $42 million into it in a very short amount of time, a significant ramp-up period in order for you to train the right people, in order for you to get the right people in place, in order for you to hire them, in order for you to significantly, take some of that take some of those wait times away. It does require a significant amount of ramp-up time.
Minister, I really appreciate that, and I think we appreciate that you've started hiring people back from the 1,000 jobs that were cut. Why aren't you hiring 1,000 people? And if it's about HR and you're not able to get the talent that you need in the center that you're operating in Charlottetown, have you looked at and explored regional centers that you can open up and change the way you're doing HR? Because this is urgent. This is a situation where veterans are falling through the cracks and they can't wait any longer.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree more. In terms of the regional centers, I mean, I think opening up the 9 offices has been a tremendous help. I think opening up the 10th office in Surrey has been a help, and I think opening up a mobile office in the northern area has been a help. We are literally hiring people as quickly as we can, and there's no number, for instance, such as 1,000. We are just literally hiring as many people as we can get to do very, very particular work that requires very specific training. And maybe, Walt, you can get into that.
First, on your first question, sir, can I just add that what is, I think, very beneficial in our budget process is that the quasi-stat budget that the minister mentioned is uncapped and demand-driven. Again, through the estimates process and the supplementary estimates process, we can ask the additional money. With regard to the drop of $200 million, as you mentioned, that was captured with the minister's comment that the year before, with the top-up of the disability award, we put
It's
out...
actually closer to 300 million. Sorry, I have, just because I'm running out of time.
Oh, sorry.
And I don't think it's the right time to not be asking for more money. I know the minister talked about 93% going to benefits, but clearly 7% isn't doing it in terms of what you need to budget to serve veterans. We talked about lap spending, and thank you for raising that, Minister. You know, the minister, you know, veterans, their families, friends, advocates, and everyone, indeed, all of us here today and in the House, broadly want better service for veterans. We know that. The Parliamentary Budget Officer concluded in that there are 3 mechanisms for transferring lap spending from one year to the next in each department. On November 6th, Parliament unanimously supported our motion, our opposition day motion, to carry forward all lap spending at Veterans Affairs each year and to dedicate that additional money, about $124 million per year on average, solely to provide better service for veterans and their families. So my question's simple. The PBO says it's possible. Parliament has unanimously approved the idea, and you personally, Minister, have approved of the idea by voting in favour of our motion. So a simple yes or no is what I'm looking for. Will you be writing to the President of the Treasury Board and the Minister of Finance to request that all lap spending be carried forward in the coming year and dedicate that extra $124 million, if that's what it is, per year to improving services to Canada's veterans until all 24 service standards are met as agreed in Parliament?
We
If, it,
will.
if it's not a yes or no, we don't have time. So do you want to, his question
Say
was
yes or no.
We're out of time.
yes or no? Yes or no? Do you want to answer that?
We will make sure that funding continues year over year to make sure that every veteran gets what they need
Okay.
and what they deserve.
On to Madam Ludwig.
Thank you. And thank you, Minister and General, for being here today. We heard from a number of witnesses before the committee about the challenge with the transition from Canadian Armed Forces to being a veteran. And I'm wondering, Minister, if you could speak directly to, I know you've talked about the career transition benefit, the education and training benefit, but we heard specifically from veterans the challenge of the training that they received within the Canadian Armed Forces not being recognized by external bodies, and if there's any work being done in that area to help, again, with the transition. Thank you.
In fact, last evening I spent some time with a group called Seamless, and they're working on very similar work, but their work is involved with making sure that even within Canada, and while they're still in service but moving from base to base, that the qualifications, for instance, of a spouse are recognized from province to province, which can get quite cumbersome. And I know things that we're trying to deal with in terms of internal economy, but these are really, really important matters, not only again for the veteran but also for the family that serves with them. And we have heard this time and again. My marching orders from the Prime Minister, and the same to my colleague, the Minister of National Defence, is to make sure that that transition happens as smoothly as possible. So, working with external bodies and with provinces to make sure that qualifications are recognized is a top priority.
Okay, thank you. We also heard before the committee regarding veterans who are homeless. In terms of housing, can you explain or share with us how veterans are prioritized in the National Housing Strategy?
Yeah, as the National Housing Strategy is rolled out over the course of the next 7 years, we're happy, as it should be, really, that veterans are a priority group. Again, we're still fashioning this, but a lot of the groups that attended our roundtable on homelessness are the same groups who will be informing our decisions with the National Housing Strategy. One item, actually, I wanted to mention in terms of homelessness that I think that will also help us is the ID card. The ID card, on the flip side of it, for the first time, will have numbers that will allow anybody who picks it up, or who reads the other side, they'll be able to see where help is being offered and how they can get direct help for a veteran, and how they themselves can receive help. But more importantly, it allows for identification of a veteran. In most instances, when they self-identify, they're not, they are indeed a veteran when they go into, let's say, a homeless shelter, et cetera, and we are then able to tap into them as a department. But there are instances where that, hasn't happened, and it just allows things to be expedited.
Thank you.
If I might just add, about a year and a bit ago, I did a foot patrol through Ottawa on a Sunday with a group called Soldiers for Soldiers, helping soldiers, and with the Royal Canadian Legion, and a number of Ottawa police officers who had formerly been in the Canadian Armed Forces. And we visited the mission, we visited the Shepherds of Good Hope, we visited the Salvation Army. I was taken not only by the fact we were able to find 7 veterans, and each one of them, we sat down and counseled them and said, here's all the tools, and we can help you do this or that. None of them came forward.
Right.
In addition to that, as we went in, a number of veterans I know were leaving through the back door because they didn't want to be found yet. And this goes back to my earlier point of working with networks of veterans so that they feel safe to come forward, to get help, and get down that road of mental health healing, resilience, and at some point in the future, go into some kind of vocational rehab in order to give them a purpose. And the minister and I were in Victoria, again, partnered with the Royal Canadian Legion, a great facility called Cockrell House,
Right.
where graduates, if I can use that word, of what I've just described, are there counseling veterans who are coming in from the bush. We've also found that a lot of veterans don't want to be in Ontario or the prairie provinces in winter if they're homeless, and they migrate from our offices to the West Coast. And so it's how we get these veterans come forward, present, so we can help them as soon as possible, when they want.
Yeah, I was going to say, in the case of these veterans, when they chose to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased. I know I hear from veterans in my area of New Brunswick Southwest about the additional services and certainly the difficult times over the last decade. So thank you.
Mr. Sampson, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you both for being here and for the Minister for your presentation. I guess I would like to, first of all, the homelessness one. I want to thank you and the government, to place priority for veteran and homelessness. There's not just the veterans. There's also other groups, but vulnerable groups, of course. But the veterans, that's a big piece. And I think you said as well that the ID card will help maybe identify some of those individuals, which is crucial. I'm looking at Irving Oil, which is shipbuilding. They've agreed now. They have a program to hire 100 veterans. So those are very big. So we need to make sure that we communicate all the benefits that are out there, because there's been a lot of benefits over the last 2.5, 3 years. So what are we doing to help in the awareness? Because I'm always afraid that people are not aware of all the benefits that they deserve.
We work with organizations like the Legion, who have been outstanding in helping to get the word out on the ground. I mean, aside from our own efforts, we still have a lot of work to do. There's also, there's communication, and there's also receiving that communication. I mean, it's making sure that people hear what you're putting out there. It's one of the reasons why, because when we talk about this issue, as I think everybody in this room can appreciate, emotions can run high sometimes, and it is an emotional issue. And social media just kind of exacerbates that. So one of the real reasons why I wanted to continue and will continue with the town halls that we do across the country is because it allows you the opportunity to speak directly to people. And these are people who, are showing up at town halls. They're motivated.
Absolutely.
And they're usually leaders in the community. Some of them are quiet and just dealing with their own thing, but many of them are people who help get the word out.
Yeah.
And it just allows you a larger forum to help explain beyond 1 or 2 bullet points what it is we're trying to do.
And that's what I want to touch. 45 is a lot since you've been appointed minister. Can you tell us some of the key things you're hearing in those public meetings?
They hold their feet to the fire better than anybody. The first thing that comes to mind is something that I acknowledged earlier in the session, and then it's wait times. And it is one thing to look at numbers, and it is quite another thing to be confronted with a veteran or a family member who has had to wait a long period of time. And you hear that out, and then you figure you're even more emboldened than you were before to make sure that you do something about it.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that comes to mind. But literally, a lot of what we are putting into place now are things that veterans have been talking about for quite some time, but they have brought out time and again in town halls, and these are often opportunities for us to tweak new initiatives.
So on that front, General, I'm leading to that question. You'll answer exactly where the minister is bringing us, because that's exactly where I want to go. I mean, we have to keep in mind that there's 32% more applicants, and 60% are new applicants. So there's an influx. So the work we're doing on the ground on awareness is helping. There's no question. But you said, what can we do? Like, when we spoke about going back, some of the materials are missing, or going back to CAF. Is there something, like, I know that there's a joint committee between CAF and the and Vax Canada. Like, what can we do to improve that? You know, it's so crucial if we can zero in on how we can make that more efficient. Maybe the ID card is going to give us some help. I know that the military veterans are telling me as well that not only the ID card, but some of the like how can we make that process faster? How can we? What do we know now that we didn't know that we can improve the time frame?
So, Minister, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I kind of put down 4 factors. One, we're hiring, as the Minister indicated, as fast as we can. And we're hiring the very best from communities coast to coast. And we're also trying to create additional capability out in the regions. You know, a Francophone adjudication team in Montreal. Another one in Winnipeg. We created a little cell in Campbellton, New Brunswick. We're creating capability because we know that in Charlottetown we have got great folks and trying to hire them as fast as we can too, but we're doing a shotgun approach. We're training them. We are providing a lot of resources because training is so important, not only for the individual, but standardization across the country. We're fixing our processes. And again, what the Minister heard in our town halls, realizing that when men and women get hurt in the Canadian Armed Forces, often they don't go to the medics because they're great troopers and they want to show up for PT the next day. And they don't get their injuries documented. That is often the case, and I speak from experience. And therefore, actually putting the case together so that we know here's what happens to an infantryman or an artilleryman or a ship's bosun. Here's what happens, and come up with an evidence model based upon their trade and their experience. And then finally, digitization. We are leveraging digitization to the degree that we can, recognizing that some people like to go the digital route, some folks like walking in the front door of the office, and some folks want a phone call. So again, we are trying to get stronger in all those areas. We have this portal called the MyVac account approach. We have thousands of people who are signing up monthly, and perhaps triggered by all these town halls. But we're over 80,000 on the MyVac account now. And in terms of new programs, the education and training benefit and the...
Sir, a minute over time on that one.
Thank you.
But I wanted to take the time to give you as much as we could there. Mr. Broussard, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, during the last election, the Prime Minister said that no veteran shall have to fight their government in court for the benefits that they deserve. Yet, during a period of 2016 and 2018, $38 million was spent on lawsuits. We've got veterans who filed a class action lawsuit at St. Anne's Hospital because of a diminishment of service and a diminishment of staff that wasn't supposed to be there when VAC transferred to the Quebec government the services that were to be provided at St. Anne's. I visited St. Anne's in June, and I saw it firsthand, and I heard firsthand from those veterans in that facility. We also have Mr. Bruea. He questioned the government, actually asked for a cost-benefit analysis on the Pension for Life scheme. And he was told that a cost-benefit analysis wasn't going to be done because it represented a less than $1 million expenditure. A less than $1 million expenditure. So the suggestion is that the Pension for Life scheme is a shell game being played by the government, that there's no additional cost and no additional benefit to our veterans. And yet, Mr. Bruea got that information from your own finance department officials, and you chose to attack him publicly. Why?
Apples and oranges. I mean, I think it's very important that we make sure that the information that we get out there is as straightforward and as truthful as we can possibly make it.
It was
there is
confirmed
enough
by your
veterans
own
out there who,
finance
frankly,
department officials,
get anxiety
Minister.
and are prone to anxiety, and we all know that anxiety can be a
was
trigger for other
confirmed
mental
by your
health
own
issues.
finance
So
officials.
what I
Why
needed to
did you
do,
attack
in not
Mr.
really
Bruea?
attacking, but in clarifying what Mr. Bruea had to say, was simply to say, look, you know, this is what we're talking about is Pension for Life. It's a very different thing. I don't want to comment too much more on it because to the point of how you began this question, it is before the courts at the moment. And certainly, you know, given my druthers, would I go to court? Do I want to go to court? No, I do not. I mean, but, you know, we're something was initiated by a veteran or by any group. I have to make sure that our department and the interests of the government of Canada are represented.
You had ample time. Why are veterans still being asked to go to court to fight their government? Why? After the Prime Minister made that promise, why is that happening?
Mr. Broussard, as I just said, and while you were over talking about it, I think I answered the question fairly clearly. I mean, there are instances, and certainly, you know, I'm not one to say that veterans or any other organization are incapable or should not be allowed to take the government to court. But where they do, I have to make sure that the government's interests and the people, you know, the interests of the department are well represented, and therefore we need to make sure that we're represented in a court of law. It's not something that I choose to do or like to do, but where it's initiated by another party, regardless of the circumstance, I got to make sure that we're well represented.
I want to focus on service dogs for a second. Minister, there was an efficacy study that was done by Laval University that in almost every circumstance, I would suggest in every circumstance, it was shown that service dogs improve the lives of veterans and their families. And yet, on April 18th, just 8 months ago, that study's been on your desk, from what I understand. Mm-hmm. On April 18th, just 8 months ago, your spokesman, Alex Wallstead, was quoted by CBC as saying that we're working to put in place standards rapidly so that veterans have access to properly trained psychiatric service dogs. It's been over 3 years since you took office, 8 months since the process collapsed, and this renewed commitment was made. This study shows that there's efficacy with respect to service dogs and the effect that it has on veterans. When will those standards be introduced?
Well, the study, which is a study that we funded, is very limited in its scope. I mean, it deals right now with about 18 veterans. It began with, I think, 22, but 4 dropped out. And the unfortunate thing, too, is that we haven't had the time yet to analyze a few other crucial factors. Where a caregiver is involved or where a caregiver is not involved. And where a caregiver is involved can not skew, but could perhaps, you know, affect the results of the study. In other words, we have to be able to zone in particularly on the effect of the service dog. And we're doing that now, but we basically need more data. Now, you're quite right in saying that, you know, anecdotally, too, we know this. I mean, it all seems to be pointing in the right direction. So we didn't waste much time, and we, you know, with the medical expense tax credit in the last budget, we told veterans that they could put some money aside, or, you know, it would count the expenses, whether it be for actually buying the dog or whether it be for feeding the dog or, you know, vet's bills, which can add up. They can apply that tax credit. So we can do that right now for people who are either going to be purchasing a dog but there's also, to be honest with you, a huge supply issue. Anybody who, you know, who's familiar with these dogs understands they are incredibly well trained, and it takes time to train them, and it takes time for them to get up to the standard that we need.
Seconds. Why has that tax credit not been initiated by the Department of Finance and the Finance Minister at this point?
The tax credit will be initiated in the tax year, in the next tax year. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll see.
Mr. Bertina, 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. Mr. Minister, I'd like to find out about the emergency fund, because what would have happened with regard to these kinds of emergencies prior to bringing that fund into effect? What would have happened in an emergency situation? Because this is new money, I understand. This is new money. So what would have happened previously before that money was budgeted?
It was an eye-opener for me on my first day as minister, getting debriefed by the deputy, because basically if we found somebody, there wasn't a pot of money. We went to wills and bequeathments, which is, you know, I was frankly shocked by that. So just to color this a little, it means that there are people out there who will or bequeath a portion of their estate to look after homeless veterans. But it's also, it's usually under particular circumstances. For instance, I'm from Calgary and I decided, you know, I want to leave some money for homeless veterans in the Calgary area. Or I want to leave money for homeless veterans from the Afghan war. You know, we would have then, once we've identified somebody, in order to get them the financial help that they need, we would have to go back into wills and bequeathments and find a match, and that could take time. I mean, you're the one who told me this, so you go ahead.
Yeah, thanks very much, sir, for the question. And just to say that the department has 23 of these funds, again, that folks over time have provided these funds for specific reasons. And so there's one, for example, for folks living on Vancouver Island, Edmonton, St. Anne's Hospital, or restrictions on how the money could be used. Of the 23, there was only one fund that was kind of open-ended, coast to coast, and for emergencies. And so case managers, veteran service agents, folks from across the country went to this fund. It was drained on a constant basis. And we did not have an authority, you know, under our legislation, regulation, to dispense public funds for requests that were in the gray zone. And so what we would do is partner with the Canadian Armed Forces in their morale and welfare, for which in my previous life I know a lot of, but they have non-public funds. And so we would request from the Canadian Armed Forces that funding to top up that specific emergency fund, which was less than adequate. And clearly, government has a responsibility to reach out to these veterans and families when they are in crisis. And therefore, it was terrific when we got this funding. And we're doing it, a process as expeditious as possible. And I find, again, things get swamped in bureaucracy, so to speak. But to enable the most junior case manager, veteran service agent, who is presented with an emergency on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock to say, we're going to get the money out to you. And even in some of these cases, we're doing the paperwork after the fact. And I'm okay with that. But just to make sure that if someone comes calling to put a roof over their heads, put some groceries on the table, or to address their no-kidding emergency. And what we have found, the difficulty is what is an emergency in one location actually could be an enduring situation in another situation. So every one of these individual cases are viewed on their own merits. But I would just also say that we have hired some of the best social workers, psychologists, and nurses coast to coast, who have a huge amount of experience, and we trust them to get on and support our veterans and their families.
So with the money that's been brought in, would it be fair to say that the program will be reviewed for its efficacy and whether it seems to be enough to handle the situation? I would assume that the next budget year there will be an allocation, so one would hope that it would.
I'm anticipating we have funding next year in this regard, sir.
Great. I have more time?
You have 1 minute.
General Natinchuk and I were together with some great veterans of the Devil's Brigade not so long ago at a special event. One from Hamilton, 95 years old, made a great speech. And subsequently, I spoke to the United Council of Veterans, member of the Veterans Committee, sitting member of government. And they asked me to speak, and I was delighted to. We had a wonderful evening, and I wonder if, General Natinchuk, you noticed that it's not always difficult questions that are being asked, and certainly the forum here today is to get to the bottom of issues. But isn't there a lot of good work being done on behalf of veterans?
Sir, there is, but we can always improve. And that's why with these town halls, to hear reflections, in some cases we're doing all right, in some cases we aren't. I would also say that the vast majority of veterans who leave the Canadian Armed Forces can transition relatively easily into civil society. 2/3 do. And we know that third that's having difficulty, often they come from the combat arms, infantry, armor, artillery, and perhaps some in the Navy as bosuns, that we need to focus on them so that they can as well find purpose and so on moving into the future. So just to say, there's a huge amount of work being done. And what's interesting is when someone is happy, they go quiet. And they come in, they whisper in the ear, they send notes. You know, we were just at a Legion event a couple of weeks ago.
I'm going to have to cut you off. I'd love to hear the story of the Legion and going there, but we are over time on that significantly. The next slot is a conservative slot, and I'm going to begin it in the chair as my prerogative. And I'm just going to ask one question of the minister, and that is this committee did a study on transitioning from the military to being civilian life and to be handled by Veterans Affairs. And the report was unanimous. All recommendations were recommended. You received it, and you came back to the former D&D ombudsman, Gary Walburn. You said no to what we recommended, which was that there should be the ability to get an attestation from Department of Defense that would confirm that their disability, if they were disabled, was attributable to their service. Why did you say no to that?
The issue, sir, is that only about 25% of our clients come to us while they're still in service. The Canadian Armed Forces Surgeon General's responsibility is to get those men and women, those sailors, soldiers, airmen and women, as healthy as possible and get them back to units right away. working closely with the Canadian Armed Forces and the Surgeon General, their view and our view was that to have one standard of assessment of service and non-service related injury was the more appropriate way. 75% of our clients come to us after they've left service. And so to have two standards, so to speak, of judgment of whether it was service or non-service was less than efficient or effective.
Okay. Mr. Walber maintains that this could be a simple fix, no cost, very low cost, to speeding up decisions on claims, if it could be attributed. That's why this committee put that recommendation in there to you. Were you aware of that was the testimony we heard from witnesses saying this is a good idea, even though it doesn't encompass everyone, as you say?
If I might, and sir, if I can just add, and we are working very closely with the Canadian Armed Forces to actually get all of that work done while people are still in uniform. The effect that you heard as a committee to be achieved so that all the homework is done before people transition, and I think as the Chief of Defense Staff has mentioned, to ensure that prior to the release of someone, if indeed they're coming forward for a medical release, be it service or non-service, that we get all that work done prior to release as effectively and quickly as we can, sir.
Okay. I'm going to yield to Mr. Johns for the balance of my time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McColman. I'm going to go back to case managers, and maybe can you tell the committee how many job cuts the last government made in the department, and how many of those were case managers, if possible? Shouldn't be a long answer. It should be short.
Sir, I don't have the detail in terms of any of that, but I would just say that again, we're working very hard to find the best case managers, social workers, coast to coast. You know, over the past, I know when I got into the job, we had just under about 200 case managers. We have hired over the past few years such that we're, I think, over 400 case managers today. And my colleagues will be here at the table in a few minutes, and they may have more detail. We'll have to come back to you.
Isn't my understanding there was 1,000 before?
I think that it's important that we drill down on numbers, because with the transfer of St. Anne's Hospital, that was a significant number of employees. There was also through a whole number of exercises over the past few years, others, but they were not, I would just want to clarify, Mr. Johns, from my understanding, they were not all at the front end case management. There was corporate services, there were a number of areas, and as well when we leveraged civilian contractors with regard to, say, Blue Cross Medivy.
Clearly we don't have enough right now. What is the case manager to client ratio currently?
My understanding at this moment, sir, we're in the order of 33 to 1.
And 25 is the target.
Our target remains 25 to 1, and as I mentioned before, we have now, we're in excess of 400 case managers. My understanding is we're hiring another 50. And the challenge, and I've met many of our the new case managers coast to coast who have come in either from other departments or actually from the schoolhouses, from colleges and universities. And what we try to do is we try to ramp them up. And so I met some case managers with higher numbers than others. The other thing we're trying to do.
I'm going to put it out to the committee at this point, because I'd like to stop the rotation if that's okay. We've got approximately 7 minutes left. And I'd like to put it out to the committee that I'll take a single question from any member on either side if you have a single question. And I'll offer the first single question to the Liberal side. Mr. Sampson.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, you spoke about pension for life, and I know in my riding I've heard from many, many veterans that they're very excited and waiting for their pension for life. And you talked about pain and suffering, 1,150. But, you know, I'd like you to talk about the other pieces, because in actuality, depending on your needs, you could have the additional pain and suffering, or you could have the income replacement, which would be even greater, because you used the example of 25 to 75, 25 years old, 75 years old, which is almost $700,000. That's just under Category 1 of pain and suffering. So can you just expand on the other two categories, please?
Yeah, and in some categories, I mean, you could be, you know, as opposed to 2015, where the maximum would have been about $315,000. Now you're looking at some, depending on circumstance, over the course of their lifetime, be $3 million. We will continue to offer a certain amount of money, $500 a year, or $500, I think, one time, where you can get financial assistance to determine this is what you want to do. And it's really important to point out, I mean, we keep saying option. We're definitely going to be nudging, as a default, people going towards pension for life, because we know, I think, as many Canadians knew when we were all grappling with the lump sum, that it is simply financially more stable to have a monthly amount. I mean, Walt could tell you stories about, going to see an injured soldier in hospital, and the family member saying, please don't give him that full amount. I mean, but at the time, that's what he or she was entitled to. Now we've got a far more lucrative option for them, and one I think that will add to wellness because of that, again, that monthly, and because of all the all the other benefits and vocational rehabilitation that will come with it. And it is, it is a significant outlay. It is $3.6 billion from the Treasury that will be going towards pension for life. That's out of the $10 billion that we have put towards new benefits and services since coming to office.
Okay, thank
This
you.
is significant.
Thank you, Minister. That's 2 minutes. I hope to keep these under 2 minutes so we can get as many in. Mr. Pissarda.
I'm going to be 30 seconds, and then I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Kitchen. Minister, will you do me a favor and send a message to the Prime Minister? Will you do that for me? Tell him next time he tweets about $50 million to Trevor Noah to think about the impact that has on veterans in this country who are fighting their government for service dogs, who are living day by day with PTSD, their lives literally on the balance, and tell him to think about that next time he puts an irresponsible tweet like that, and maybe that money can be better spent on veterans and service dogs. Mr. Kitchen.
Thank you. No, I said one per member.
Seconds.
Mr. Johns.
So my question is when? When do you expect Veterans Affairs Canada to meet the 25-to-1 client-to-case manager ratio? When will that happen? What's the plan?
Mr. Johns, if I could give you a date, I would. But all I can say is that we're working full for on it. We are hiring people as quickly as we possibly can within the Federal Civil Service. It is very easy to let these people go. It is very difficult to rehire them back.
Can I also say, Mr. Johns, that what we're doing as well is, so we're hiring as quickly as we can, getting folks through a training school to standardized training. What the other thing we're doing, we're actually looking at each individual veteran. When I meet with case managers, I ask them, how many of your cases, and often they have that number of 35 and 40, how many do you actually have to engage with, support them on a weekly basis, and so on. Generally, the number is much lower than that higher number. And one of the things we have to do is say, who are out there that are medium risk, high risk? How do we triage them? Because sometimes it's just from our processes, somebody's on a vocational rehab program, we automatically give them a case manager, when indeed they're doing like really well. Some are master students, PhD students. We've met ordinary seamen who are going to university, and we're providing them a case manager. We are starting a new program. It'll be coming out in the next little while. We've been piloting for a little while, called Guided Support. And we're taking veteran service agents who have a number of files and saying, right, we need to have you now support those veterans who are no longer at a high risk because they're graduating. They're actually moving forward. And provide them support to transition them until we know for certain that they are low risk, recognizing that things can turn around, and if they do, let's get them back to case management. But a much more agile system than we have right now, while at the same time hiring the best social workers we can, or attracting them from the provinces, attracting them from anywhere, and training them up. So it's basically a multi-layered approach to addressing this need. Because we do know that with our case managers, the probability that someone will be reestablished, have purpose, and move on with their well-being is much higher.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. That wraps up the hour. Thank you for coming. Thank you for responding under the gun. This is good for our democracy, and so we appreciate you being here. Next time, maybe you consider 2 hours, Minister. It would be very. It would send a great signal to the committee and to Parliament, if you would. We were told today that these are independent committees, so let's make it independent and let's make it innovative by a minister coming for 2 hours. Just a suggestion.
Okay.
But please consider it.
Done.
Thank you, General Natition, for your service to our country. Thanks. And for your continued guidance for our veterans. We will adjourn till the next panel. behalf of the meeting. Welcome witnesses. We welcome Charlotte Bastien, the Acting Deputy Minister, Strategic Oversight and Communications, Bernard Butler, the Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Policy and Commemoration, Michelle Dorian, the Assistant Deputy Minister, Service Delivery, and Elizabeth Stewart, the Assistant Deputy Minister, Chief Financial Officer, and Corporate Services. Welcome. We have 10 minutes available for...
Mr. Chair, we have no opening comments, so
opening
we turn it
comments?
right over to the questions.
Lovely. This is great. Wow. Okay, we'll get started. Our first questioner shall be Mr. Kitchen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here again and come to talk to us. I brought up a question a couple of weeks ago, and it was dealing with the posters that are being done. And I'm just wondering to get clarification from the budget. There's talk of $180,000 allocated for funds related to government advertising programs. And I'm wondering, is that the amount for these posters that are being sent out that have phone numbers that take forever to get on?
Just to clarify, thank you for the question, sir. Just to clarify, the posters, you mean the articles that went into the newspapers and things like that, or is there another poster?
No, they're the posters that are being sent out to organizations, et cetera. A nice poster, and it has this is a crisis, and here's a line number to call, and when you call that number, you're on hold and on hold and on hold, and people can't get through. And I brought that up in committee here a couple weeks ago, and I'm just wondering if this $180,000 is allocated for that.
We do have a budget for advertising, and we do have a budget for producing communication material. The reference that I'm not sure of the specific, but I'll get back to you, but we do have budget to provide posters of that nature, but also other types of communication material, whether it's for awareness of what's available regarding emergency assistance, or also some of the programs that were put in place last April, and some of the programs that will be put in place next April, and also some of the commemoration activity that's been underway.
If I may,
Sure.
As it relates to the supplementary estimates alpha, this funding is related to government advertising programs, and it's a horizontal item for the federal government writ large, and it largely has to do with the Remembrance Campaign of the Government of Canada this fiscal year.
Okay, so it's more the Remembrance Campaign. It's
Yes.
not about. So the advertising that gets put out for these for these posters then would fall into what budget?
It would typically fall into either the outreach and communications budget, or specifically into one of the service delivery budgets, depending on the situation.
Okay. And just because I'm not an accountant, define what a horizontal item means.
Okay, that is, I guess, government speak for initiatives that have a broad reach across several government agencies and departments. So in this case, the lead for this one is actually the Treasury Board Secretariat, and we have but one part that we play into the larger initiative.
Sure. You probably heard, or may have heard, my conversation earlier with the minister and dealing with the issue on this suicide hotline or the assistance line. And obviously I've got some concerns about that, and Mr. Dorian and I have chatted a little bit about that. And but it is concerning when we've got a line that we're being told, and when we put forward in committee, hang on a sec here. And when we did the study on mental health on Canadian veterans and a family purpose, and in it we talked about, in the preamble, about between the Canadian Forces and Veteran Affairs, and including recommendations which may ultimately be used in the development of a coordinated suicide prevention program. And recommendation 13 said, VAC and Health Canada work together to make the Veteran Affairs Canada Assistance Service available through online chatting and accessible through multiple platforms. Now, we had a great fanfare about this suicide prevention strategy that we have, and we have this line, and we have this system, and anybody that obviously veterans that have been contacting me are telling me this system doesn't work. And we're spending money on this to try and talk people from that cliff where they may be at. And I'm just wondering, A, how much money are we spending on this line? Because if we are, we're wasting it. And B, what can we do to make certain that it isn't?
Thank you for the question. We're spending approximately $1 million a year on that line. And I'm rounding the figures, but approximately $1 million a year. Last year, we got over 1,300 calls. This year, calls and referrals. And this year, it's in the 1,600 call mark. Following your comments at a couple of weeks ago, I forget which committee meeting, they did come back to me. We have contacted Health Canada because this emergency line is run by Health Canada. And we related our concerns because I'm not debating the information you brought forward. But I'm very concerned that if that happened, I'm extremely concerned because somebody that's calling that line is supposed to get a certain level of service. And there are times of the day or times at certain points that the lines are busy and they're given 3 different options. It's quite clear up front. You can wait. We'll give you us a number, call you back, or call 911 if you're in a crisis. I mean, those are the 3 options. So we have followed up with them and we've asked for a deep dive. What has happened here? Did something actually happen? I don't know if I'll ever be able to get to the bottom of the case that you've brought to my attention, to be honest. I mean, they do get a lot of cases, but we do take it extremely seriously. And our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Kulshan, who's appeared in front of this committee on more than one occasion, is actually talking with them to ensure that that type of event doesn't.
We're a good minute over on time, so Mr. Bertina, you got 5 minutes.
Welcome back, everybody. On backlogs, I'm confused about how files are dealt with and whether they're closed or not, because if I've had individuals come to my constituency office with a certain request, found out later, bumping into the person, yeah, it was all great, I got the benefit. So is that it? No, I've got another one. So can you ever close a file? It must be fairly complex to keep statistics on things like backlogs and so on.
Thank you for the question. It's not that complex to keep the stats. We're actually really digging into what the stats are. And it is not easy to close a file because we're talking with a disability award, a disability pension. So we're talking disability, we're talking dealing with health professionals, we're talking medical appointments, so on and so forth, depending on the case. I mean, they're not all complex, let's be honest. The reality is we are working real hard to try to facilitate that. And since, I don't know if it's my last appearance or the one before, we've actually really drilled down in the numbers and where are the files in the process. Today, or last Friday, I guess, we have approximately 4,000 files waiting for documentation from either a medical professional or the veteran. Now, so when you look at the pending, that's all in the pending. So, but at the end of the day, the reality is we have a backlog. And at the end of the day, it's taken us too long to adjudicate. And we've brought forward, we have implemented a lot of new initiatives, integrated teams. The files aren't bouncing around between units because, you had a unit, junior, nurses, doctors, and the file goes here, and then you send it to the next person. Well, it stays a couple of weeks on the shelf until somebody takes it off. Then that person does it. Oh, I have to send to a doctor, a couple of weeks. So you have this process. We've piloted it, and we're going to go full hog on it because now the team is integrated. So I go to you and I give you the file, and you look at it right away, and we make a decision. A file that would have taken 8 months, an 8 condition, because that's the other thing people don't often mention. They come forward, it's not one condition. If you're coming forward with hearing loss, period, that's pretty straightforward. What they're coming forward with is 8 different conditions. And a file like that could take 8-9 months. They did it in half a day with 1 letter to the veteran. Now, let's not say we've won the battle yet because I'm far from having won it. There's still a lot of work to be done. But we are really starting to put some of the stuff. So we've now drilled down. We now know where the files are. We knew that before, but I wanted clarity because what I've learned in 29 years of operations is you can fix problems, but if you're not fixing the right one, you're just creating something else somewhere else, right? So we've really been digging into that. Our biggest issue is, we have a very complex system. I mean, I think everybody on this table knows that. But the biggest issue is we have huge amounts coming forward. And, last month in November was our biggest month in history. 48,000 files came out the door. Unfortunately for me and for the veterans, 5,400 files came in. And we've doubled the production of our employees. And it's still not enough. So we're looking at all avenues. The deputy and the minister talked about some. We're adding staff. We're adding new process, eliminating steps. We still have a ways to go, and we can do better, and we have to do better.
Okay, so it's not fair to discuss individual cases. I know it sounds awful, and why did you do that? You need all the details. But one thing that keeps coming up is a veteran who's asking for a benefit will say, well, I have this physician's report, but they won't accept it. What's that all about?
Thank you. That's a great question, and it's one that annoys me. So what happens is, if it's a complex case, and depending what is written on the form, our nurses refer to our own doctors for I'll call it a second opinion for an assessment. We're actually working on limiting the number of times that's happening, because if a doctor is giving and if it's clear. Let's not forget, all respect to doctors, and I know there's a couple around the table, sometimes the notes are not very clear what the diagnosis is, or then we do have to do it. But when it is clear, to try to avoid sending that to our doctors, because it's twofold. It's frustrating for the veteran, but it's causing delays in the processing. And that goes to a doctor. Our doctors have to look at it. Sometimes they have to send additional information to a doctor and get some more forms filled out. So you're just adding all this time to the process, and we are actually looking at, we're doing some process re-engineering to make sure that that's being, I won't say eliminated, it will never be eliminated, but at least decreased.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We know that the government right now is only meeting half. First of all, thank you for your service and for your work. We know that the government's only meeting half of their 24 self-identified service standards. Some of them are predating this government. Some are getting worse under this government. Based on your current planning and priorities, when do you expect Veterans Affairs Canada to meet all 24 service standards?
The services falls under me, so I will try to answer that, but I don't have a date. I can't give you a date, even if I had a date. I can't, because we've had a huge increase in, I'll just touch adjudications.
Well, I think you just did talk a little bit about the increase, and
Yeah.
you explained some of that reason why. What resources do you need to get there? And, why are you not meeting these targets? And what can Parliament do? What funds do you need, resources to get there?
Well, thank you for the question, and I do thank you for your efforts. It's just not the first time you hammer me on how many resources do you need. I'm very happy we received the $42 million.
Oh, I'm sure, but it's not enough. And so what is enough? We're trying to get that number.
There are numbers, but the issue we actually have
Sorry,
is...
you said there are numbers. Can you tell us what the numbers are?
Well, I mean...
What is it that you've requested that you need to meet those standards?
Well, the $42 million we got now will go a long way.
But that wasn't what you requested. We know you need more. Can you tell us what you need? What those numbers are?
I can't, because it's government privilege, and it was given to cabinet. But we have asked for money, and we received the $42 million, and I'm very thankful about that. But what we need to remember is there's a lag by the time the money is approved and the time the production starts going. And if you look at that lag, I have hired 42 adjudicators already this year, but they are not yet producing. Why? I got authority in June to do it. The people are hired. We are now in training. They're going to start producing in January.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that, like the time that it takes. But my concern is that clearly we know that we don't have enough employees. We're not being told, because it's parliamentary cabinet privilege, I guess, that what actually we need, which is disappointing, because I think if we knew what was necessary, we'd be trying to fight for you to get that, because I think it's actually disgraceful that the government isn't giving you what you need. Veterans shouldn't be waiting, and these service standards, like, when basically, I know Mr. Kitchens asked a lot of questions around the call center, and I really appreciate his work on this, and you can expect it to be connected by 2 minutes. That's a standard that you've set. Your target for that 2-minute connection is met 80 is to make it set is 80% of the time, but you're only meeting at 66% of the time. What's it going to take to get people to answer the phone?
Okay,
we've got to have someone on the other end, or people fall through the cracks.
So thank you, and that's actually an excellent example. Some of these standards are always difficult to reach for the simple reason that if I take the phones, and I thank you for bringing it up because I wasn't thinking of that one. When we brought in the new programs in April, 7 new programs, I can't put enough people. The government cannot give me enough money, and I can't put enough people. Well, I guess they could give me enough money. I shouldn't say that, but I can't put enough people on the phones to answer every phone in April and May. And it would be improper use of dollars to do that. Unfortunately, that means for the rest of the year, I'm catching up. Because, same thing last year when we upped the DA. That month, my accessibility on the phones for April was about 10%. Because everybody wanted to know, how come I got, $40,000 in my bank account? Where did that money come from? The rest of the year, we're doing pretty good. But we lost a year in the first month and a half, and the government, even if you gave me the money, I can't get enough people in the seats and answer the phones. And then what do I do with the people after, because the volume is not there? It's a spike, right? So we have to manage these funds very prudently, because it is taxpayer money, and I feel very strongly about that. But I think where we do need to go is not additional money. I think we need to invest, and we are with PFL, in a new way of our systems and maximizing the use of electronic systems. It's not necessarily the number of people.
So why is that not happening right now?
Well, we're working towards April 1st on PFL, and the PFL will be a whole different system of application.
And so the idea is to clear the backlog then right after that's implemented then. How long will it take after that?
I'm hoping, I don't know, PFL will clear the backlog. What PFL will do is going forward, it will be a lot faster to receive your disability award, disability payment, because it's a different system. And the controls and it's all in the system. The backlog will be in existence, and I'll have to get rid of that backlog as we're working on the new one, and I've just got the sign, so thank you.
You, sir, but that's okay. Okay. Mr. Sampson.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here today and to continue helping us to find answers. I guess it's so important. I guess I'll continue on the same topic of question. I mean, I'm puzzled as well at that wait time, and I realize that we got 32% more ask, and I realize 60% are new, so it puts enormous stress. And I know we're doing a lot. We're the joint committee between the CAP and VAC and trying, but when I'm hearing that some of the reason for the delays is the fact that something is missing, or we got to go back to CAP and find out. I really don't like that. And we talked about how can we ensure that we get this right. So 2 things. I mean, do we have a tracking system? So maybe this question has already been answered, but if I put in an application and can I go on weekly and find out where my application is at, what desk is at, how long should I have to wait? Like I know I was superintendent of the French School Board, and when there was a request for maintenance and anything, you put the request in, and weekly you could track it to see who did what, where it's at, and who's now supposed to take a decision and didn't take it yet. Do we have a complex system in the process that the veteran can go look for?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we do. It's not as advanced as it could be, and under PFL it will be much better, but we do. What's frustrating for the veteran is it may stay in the same place for 2 months. And that, I get complaints about that. I'm being very honest. I get the complaints on it.
Well, as you should.
Absolutely. I'm not saying I shouldn't.
As you should. My question is, what would be the reason it got stuck for 2 months?
Well, it's because, I'm going to try to explain the process very quickly. So there's a unit that prepares the file. And so the file comes in, there's a unit that, so if you go on your system, My VAC account, which we have over 80,000 people on that now, the system will say it's in file prep. But it may be in file prep for many weeks because your documentation is not complete. And the veteran may think it is complete. And you know, by the time we go back to the veteran or we go to the military for a file or so on and so forth, but it stays there. And it doesn't say the reasoning why it's there. Then it'll go to adjudications. And it may be in adjudications for many weeks for the same reason. So that's why I'm saying.
Well, just to, and again, I'm not trying to be difficult, but if I buy a ticket, Air Canada, and I start answering the info I need to require, and I press the button go, it says, no, not going anywhere, buddy. You didn't answer question 3. You didn't get question 4. If we had that process, they couldn't file unless that was happening. Or if we had a caseworker that's working with you, and again, I don't have all the details, ensuring that all the data and the information is there, then we'd be able to do it. So I'm just wondering, how can we make it better? Because we need to make it better. And you'd agree with me, of course.
Of course, sir.
So what can we do?
So that is actually what we are doing, and that's the part I'm looking at, the process we're looking at to eliminate the steps. So as an example, we've worked very closely with the military. We're no longer requesting all the medical files. They've given us access to certain systems, and there's certain files we know we don't need, so we're not asking. That's eliminating some time. We are actually looking at exactly what you just said. If it's not complete, like your passport, the example we use is passport.
Yep. Passport's a good one, too.
Return to the veteran, and we're actually looking at that.
Anyway, I have to get a second question in. Thank you. Commemoration, Mr. Butler. I know we invested in some improvements in investments in certain areas and improvement in the cemeteries and that. But I'm hearing some veterans tell me, and tell me if you've heard this. A lot of veterans are telling me that they don't see themselves on many cenotaphs. So if they were in certain places or most places, if they were Afghanistan veterans and it doesn't mention Afghanistan on certain cenotaphs, have you heard that? And what would you say to that?
Well, thank you for the question. It's certainly a pleasure to be here today. So on that issue, I mean, that's clearly an issue that we are concerned about in terms of trying to ensure that we understand fully what the modern day veteran is, how we refer to them, how they wish to be recognized, and how to go about doing that. I would point out that cenotaphs across the country are not owned by Veterans Affairs Canada. They're owned by local communities and so on.
Yeah.
But it's a very challenging question, actually, because a lot of modern day veterans, they'll tell you they don't even see themselves as being veterans.
That's right.
Let alone looking to be recognized on a typical November 11th event, for instance, as we had a few weeks ago here in Ottawa. So we are cognizant of it for sure, Mr. Sampson, and one that we continue to survey our population of veterans. We continue to ask that question, and we continue to try to reflect the modern reality of our population.
In closing, and I was closing, but in closing, if you give me just a quick second, I'm hearing a lot by veterans in my writing, a lot of them. A lot of them are talking about it, so it's an issue. Thank you.
Madam Ludwig.
Thank you. I was getting caught up with my colleague here. Thank you all for your presentations today, and certainly the work that you're doing for veterans. I'm not only the daughter of a veteran, I'm actually the sister of a veteran. And Veterans Affairs certainly is an important service that, so many of us recognize as invaluable and critical, really, to the health and well-being of people that have served and have given so much. We heard from different witnesses regarding veterans who are homeless, and one of them specifically was Matthew Pierce. He's with the Old Brewery Mission, He's the president and CEO. And one of the things that he had recommended was temporary rent subsidies. Is that something that's being looked at not only within Veterans Affairs, but also a whole of government approach? Maybe it's the National Housing Strategy, or how would that work in terms of for a veteran? Thank you.
So I can thank you so much for the question, and we certainly have heard that as a proposition, and we certainly know that there are similar approaches in the U.S. as an example. So it is one that we're certainly mindful of. I think it's one of those many good ideas that is out there that is being considered as part of the overall response. I think it's really important to underscore the fact that the homelessness issue in Canada, both for Canadians and for veterans, is one that quite clearly requires a global, collective government and community response, and that there's no one single answer to the problem. So that particular idea, we certainly have heard that now and are certainly mindful of it, and one that we will certainly be exploring further with our many, many partners in this domain. As the Minister said, that's the type of thing that with our homelessness roundtable that we had in June, we had the opportunity to engage with so many folks who really, work in the day-to-day world of homelessness and who have much really to offer in terms of that collective global solution. So we're certainly mindful of it, and one that we will continue to look at.
Thank you. My next question is actually related to research. We've heard from a number of witnesses, a lot of the information they're collecting is anecdotal. And, is there a plan within the government for the measurement and collection of data? And I'm wondering how Veterans Affairs measures success in the programs that are existing today.
So, and thank you again for the question, because it's really quite an interesting one. The area of research is absolutely fascinating in the domain now of veterans. And as you know, there are organizations like the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research, with whom we are strongly partnered, and our partnerships with a whole range of other players, including the Canadian Armed Forces, DND, Stats Canada, and so on. There's a lot of data being generated now, for sure. From our perspective, singularly within Veterans Affairs Canada, the reports and so on that we produce as a function of our research, we certainly do publish it where appropriate and where possible. We make it available to the public through our websites and so on. So there is a lot going on in that domain, for sure. And as I say, it's an area that seems to be burgeoning. And recently at a Five Eyes conference that our minister attended, it was singularly a recurring theme amongst our allied countries in terms of maximizing research in domains such as mental health and suicide, homelessness, and so on, and ensure that there are opportunities for both collaboration and ensuring that information is disseminated across the country, internationally.
Okay, thank you. Of the $1.1 billion for total operating expenditures, what proportion, as you've just mentioned, what proportion is actually allocated to mental health services?
I don't have the figure exactly for mental health services at my disposal at the moment.
It's good.
Got the,
It's because there is a lot of different components of 1.1, so we'll have to actually give you the because it's OSIs has a percentage, then DA, mental health, so we'd have to figure out, but we will get that number.
Okay, thank you. My next question comes again to the collaboration piece. We've heard from a number of witnesses that have said, as a veteran, the challenge sometimes is an organization or a provincial government or municipality will say, oh, you're a veteran, that's not our responsibility. And is there a plan, or as you're working through programs from a practical perspective, where you may be more working in collaboration with the provinces than perhaps what happened previously, so the gap gets smaller?
Thank you for the question. The answer is yes. Canada is a big country. We deal a lot with healthcare and Veterans Affairs. But we're not a primary provider of healthcare. We subsidize healthcare. We support provinces in healthcare. So we do work with all provinces. We probably don't work that much with the municipalities themselves, but we do work with various groups in the communities that help veterans, homelessness, or, there's a multitude of them, and our local offices are extremely well attuned to whatever is in their community. Because if you're in Saskatchewan, you have a certain reality as opposed to a Halifax, as opposed to a Toronto. So my area directors and my staff, case managers, veteran service agents are very well attuned to that. At a more macro level, we do work with provinces because every province has a different mechanism for charging back. They have different rules and regulations related to healthcare, related to veterans. So we do, either from my colleague in policy or either from an operational perspective, deal with them. As an example,
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Broussard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michelle and Bernard, which one of you, either of you, were involved in the St. Anne's Bellevue transfer? Michelle?
I was not involved with the transfer, but I am now on the transfer committee.
What was your understanding when the transfer agreement was made between the federal government for Veterans Affairs and the provincial government with respect to the level of service to our veterans?
That we would the transfer agreement stipulated that the level of services were to be maintained.
Right. So on October 2nd, the day after the Quebec election, Mr. McColman wrote a letter to Premier Francois Legault because of complaints of veterans within the St. Anne's Hospital. I actually visited, as I said to the minister, I visited the hospital back in June. As fate would have it, I spent about an hour there. I talked to, in particular, Mr. Solkin and others as well, about the level of care and how it's diminished over the years, less employees. And as fate would have it, as I left the hospital to take an Uber ride back to my hotel, the driver of the Uber was actually an employee, a long-term employee. 35 years he spent at St. Anne's. And we started talking about the reason for my visit. And he said to me that the level of care has diminished to a point where the safety and security of our veterans are at stake. What are you doing about that?
Thank you for the question. A lot actually. And I would like to clarify, I'm not sure who the taxi driver was, or the Uber driver was, but the safety and the security itself, from a medical perspective, has been maintained. What has occurred is there was a decrease, and I say was because the St. Anne's Hospital, or the CIUS, who runs, and I don't know what CIUS means, the acronym, but the group that runs it, have put a lot of effort to improve. So for sure, after the transfer, there was a decrease in services, and I want to be careful.
Have they got back up to the level in which they were expected to by back?
They are very close, to be honest. Is there still issues? There was, but let's be honest, even when we ran it, we had people in the hospital that were not happy with certain things, and those of us that do deal with long-term care facilities, food is often a big issue in every facility. I'm just
It's
using
not
that as an
just
example.
food. There's dental care the service levels have diminished. There's chiropody care where the service levels have diminished. Physical care where the service has diminished. Doctor visits, the services have diminished. At least they were in June. So if you're telling me that they've improved since June to this point, then that's good news. But the reports that we're getting is that the service levels are still significantly lower than what the expectation was when that transfer agreement was maintained.
I can't comment to the expectation, and I do have to be careful what I comment because there is a court case on it, but I want to be as open as I can.
That should speak volumes, Mr. Dorian,
I
to the
absolutely
issue
know.
at St. Anne's, don't you think?
Absolutely.
The fact that 95-year-old veterans have to take Veterans Affairs to court should be a wake-up call to Veterans Affairs as to the level of service that's going on, or the lack of service that's going on at that facility.
Well, sir, a court case is a court case. I don't want to get you everything that's in the
Can I ask you quickly then, what type of audit system is in place in that transfer agreement between VAC and the Quebec government to ensure that those levels of service, the money that's being funded to maintain those levels of service, what sort of audited services do you use in order to show that?
They bill us for the services, and we actually have the reports on the time and the people being used on the floors to collaborate that or collate that with what we're being
Are you
charged.
100% sure that the money that VAC is paying is actually going to the services that veterans
Yes, I
expect?
am.
Okay. Mr. Kitchen, I'm going to split a bit of time with him.
Thank you. So my question, we've heard recently from testimony here at committee that about 2/3 of the emergency fund has already been spent. And it's likely to run dry long before the end of this fiscal year. And we've learned also that VAC officials will likely lean outside organizations, lean on them to assist out even more. So what are you going to do when that fund runs out before the end of the year?
Thank you for the question. I would commence by confirming that the Veterans Emergency Fund expenditures for this fiscal are just north of $700 million of the $1 million that's allocated. I would add, as the deputy mentioned in his testimony earlier, we do have 23 trust accounts at a current P7 value of approximately $1 million that can also be drawn upon.
So you're going to utilize another fund?
These are the accounts that have been with Veterans Affairs for many years, which are bequeathed to the
So then why are you
department.
leaning on these volunteer service organizations to have them do more and pushing people to those organizations?
Thank you for the question. We have to remember that although this is an emergency fund, there are requirements. And some of the people coming forward for services are not emergencies. I can give you a whole list of, because of time I won't, but a whole list of examples of people coming forward trying to get $2,500 for stuff that is not considered an emergency. And in some of those cases, the case manager will refer the individual back to whoever is best suited in the community to help them, because it is not under the definition of the fund an emergency.
But you're not giving them money, but you are at over 700,000 at this point in time
Mr.
with
Kitchen?
little time.
Mr. Kitchen? That's it. We're way over time. Sorry, Mr. Dorian. If you'd like to address that in a later questioning round, please do. Okay. Mr. Ellefson.
Thank you all for coming. So one of the things that's happened in our mandate, there were the 9 veteran service offices that were closed by our previous government. We've reopened those. So far, we've hired more than 400 frontline staff and still hiring more. As was said in the earlier testimony, they're being hired as fast as we can train them. Now, what impact have these changes had to the veterans' ability to deliver veteran services?
Thank you for the question. I mean, additional staff for sure have improved the services, whether it is the 9 offices or the additional case managers we've hired, put into the offices, or the additional adjudicators. So all the additional resources and the additional programming, because it's not just people. I mean, we have received a lot of new programming in the last couple of years, have helped veterans in general. It doesn't mean that we don't have veterans struggling. We do. The downside effect is I have backlogs, which I have to keep trying to figure out. But it has helped. And as a case in point, I've been coming to this committee now for 5 years. When I took this job 5 years ago, it's the hardest job I ever had. And every single day, I would have 3-4 messages, often from people in various locations, receiving complaints from veterans. And crisis, I call them crisis. Today, I still get 20 emails a day from various constituency offices. Well, they go through the minister's office, but they all come to me, and I read them all. I have a team working on it, but I actually read them because I want to know what's happening out there. But the reality is 19 of the 20 is because of the timelines. And I won't break down that some are legit and some are not. I mean, you can get to the whole. So it is much better. That said, as the deputy mentioned, there is still 33% that are having a hard time in transition, and we have to do better, and that's why we're working closely with the Canadian Armed Forces on better transition. So if we do a good transition, hopefully it's a better landing. But I think the money and the programming have come a long way. We can still do better, but they've come a long way.
All right, thank you. Now, we talk about backlogs. Can we give an idea of the extent of the backlogs, say in the spring of 2015?
I've been told by somebody who's been around longer than I have that there's always been backlogs at Veterans Affairs. But I know when I arrived, there was backlogs. I arrived in December 2013, and there was backlogs then. In those days, or 2014, we finished the year at about 36,000 files and adjudications. The backlog by memory was probably in the 6,000 range, 7,000. We did do a big push at one point to bring that down. Actually, it was a bit higher than that. We did a big push to bring it down. As new programmings come in, more demands come in. I think I've told this committee here before, my personal calculation is that we will hit over 60,000 files and adjudications this year. I may be off by a couple, and please, if I'm wrong, don't. But I think we're going to be pretty close. Last year we had 52,000. And the backlog now is higher than the 6,000 it was, where the backlog is just under 14,000.
Okay, thank you. And I understand that there's been a 32% increase in the number of applications?
That is correct.
And that's over what time period that you've had that 32% increase?
Over the last 2 years, so year over year.
Okay, so that would be, would you say that that's also contributing to the backlog?
Absolutely. We have more files coming in, and as the deputy and the minister mentioned, from one perspective, it's a good thing. People are coming forward. We have to do better, and we have to do better. That I can't give excuses on that. But there are more files coming in. There are more programs, and the big game changer, I think, is when the earnings loss benefit went to 90%. That's where it really, really moved, not only in adjudications, but in case management. At that point, on October 1st, that December, my case management was below 30% the ratio. I was at about 28 point something. And within a 3-month period, the number of people that start coming forward, applying, the number of people that needed case management, everything else, just skyrocketed. And when you're running at an approval, first app approval of about 85%, which is what we're running. In 2014, we're running at about 70. People now are saying, well, I have a good chance of getting it in, right? And especially on the mental health side and that, we're really making efforts. So I think all said and done, that's why we're seeing this big influx coming.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
Number one, when the agreement between the government of the day, and I believe it was the previous government, and of the transition to St. Anne's, of the services they're providing, I believe the number was 738 individuals that were previously working at Veterans Affairs were transferred to the payroll of St. Anne's. Am I correct in saying that?
I would have to confirm the number of people transferred because I was not part of the transfer. But
Yeah, I recall that from the time. So technically you could say that those were jobs that were cut from VAC, correct?
They were transferred to the province.
Yeah, so you could say the government of the day cut 738 jobs.
I would say they were transferred to the province.
Yeah,
but
exactly. So would I. Physically, I know this is not an easy question. I've been very critical publicly. You know that. You've probably heard my comments of because I ran a business and I know about growth of business and what it does to you and how it strains you and how you have to figure out how to deal with it. And you've got growth, and you've got to figure out how to deal with it on a timely basis. And I talk about redesign, re-engineering, things you have to do. Not only add people, but look at your systems. So I'm happy to hear you say that. One of the issues, and a couple of specific things, when you talk about adding adjudicators, where physically are they being added in the operations?
In multiple places, sir. We've added some in Charlottetown. I've opened up a unit there in training presently in Montreal because of some of the comments from the Ombudsman on the French language. So it's unacceptable. I'm also the champion of official languages at Veterans Affairs. So we've added a unit there. We've added resources in Winnipeg. Well, I shouldn't say added resources. These are new resources. We were not doing adjudications in those sites.
Right.
And I've added a unit, and I'm talking purely adjudications, in Kirkland Lake.
Okay, so they're not all in Charlottetown?
No, sir.
What is the physical need in Charlottetown to add? We heard the minister and the deputy talk about adding people as fast as they can. I immediately think of square footage of space you need to house these people as one of the issues you got to deal with. How are you dealing with it?
Thank you for the question. Within my IMIT division, that division also carries responsibility for looking after accommodation requirements. And through the planning process for the growth, my team has been involved from the outset to understand what the space requirements are for office openings and every other requirement across the country. And we work very closely with PSPC and Shared Services Canada to do the fit up and find the space. And we've been very well supported.
Are you at capacity in Charlottetown from a physical plant point of view?
I would say no. I would say we could still find additional capacity.
So has there been a series of additions put onto the building?
Not in my recent history. I've been with the department for 2.5 years. We've maximized the infrastructure that we have, and we also have dealt with PSPC for rental of space that doesn't constitute an addition to a building, but space that we find in other complexes.
Okay. Let's move on to Mr. Johns for 3 minutes, sir.
We talked about the plan to deal with the backlog, and I'm just wondering, you said you couldn't give me the number that you've requested of the minister. What I'm asking, maybe you can answer this. Have you actually costed a plan to deal with the backlog? Has that analysis been done?
The analysis has been done, and the costing is not all finished because of the point that the chair has made. I'm of the view it's not warm bodies I need.
Sorry?
It's not warm bodies I need. We need to change the fundamental way we're doing business. That means maximizing artificial intelligence, AI, maximizing the use of our systems. My VAC account actually works very well, and if you file through my VAC account, we can do what sir, you've been talking about. Make sure you're not only tracking, but the file is complete. So that's the area we're now costing. We're working closely with my IT colleagues. We've learned a lot in the past 2 budgets. When we implemented the DA, nobody had to apply, and the system worked. When we did the new 7 programs last year, or April 1st, 2018, there was some applicants, there were new programs. But if you look at the VEF, and I know people have comments about the VEF, but if you apply, not VEF, sorry, the education benefit. If you apply for the education benefit, they will say, is this you, Michel Doiron? You'll say yes. Is this your service number? Yes. You don't have to do more. The system will behind the scene, and if they find me and my service number and my file is clean, you get an answer pretty fast. That's what we need to do, and we're costing that side of the argument is to give it maximize smart technology that's out there.
We appreciate the modernization and working towards that and using technology and innovation. However, the government's announcing more and more new programs, yet I don't see that that's been probably costed because the backlog's growing. And I appreciate that you're going to take some action on trying to be more efficient, but clearly there's not enough staff. And how much new money requested in the supplementary estimates will be dedicated to hiring caseworkers? Have you identified that?
I don't have the dollar amount, but I do have the number of individuals.
Okay.
We under the surge proposal, we call it the surge. It was 50 case managers.
Okay. I asked you last winter if you had a plan to hire veterans, to serve veterans. We've Last winter, you didn't have a number. In the spring, you had a number of 10%. By 2020 is the goal. Just wondering if you can give us an update. We've heard from veterans as witnesses here. I've asked almost every witness how they feel about it, and they wholeheartedly support it. And just wondering if you can give us an update on the measurement and how that's going to meet those goals.
Thank you for the question. Being a veteran myself in the public service, I can definitely relate. The deputy and the minister, upon the enactment of the Veterans Hiring Act, issued a challenge and challenged their counterparts to make a pledge. The pledge that we made at the time remains. We are currently working very closely with the Canadian Armed Forces, both on the uniform side of the House and with the Assistant Deputy Minister, Human Resources Civilian, and also with the Public Service Commission, who has the accountability for oversight of the implementation of the Veterans
Do you know what your
Hiring
number
Act.
is within the department in terms
Pardon
of
me?
having veterans serving veterans?
I believe, I don't have it exactly. I will have to get back to you on that. I believe it is what you stated, the 10% by
2020 is
2020.
the goal.
I'll have to get back to you on the exact.
Yep, great. Thanks.
Yep.
Johns, Mr. Martel, you have 3 minutes to finish up.
Okay, Monsieur Doiron.
Mr. Doiron, good afternoon. We talked about the wait times, and we said that was the biggest problem. It's 19 of 20 complaints always pertain to the wait lines. In concrete terms, what can we do to deal with these delays? If it's the big problem, you're quite right. I didn't want to cut you off. Mr. Martel. Yes, the wait times and delays, that's one of our major problems. It is the big problem. That's why we started to do a complete review of our procedures. We no longer ask for unnecessary information. We're doing away with certain steps. For example, we did some changes to the CAF system for medical files. We used to ask for the entire medical file, and that would take 90 days to get the file. So if you're just waiting that time for the file, well, you don't have much time left to do the processing. In many cases now, we just have access to the system. We don't ask for the medical records. We're talking about private information here. So we have all kinds of privacy rules we have to follow. And when we did a review, and this is just one example, we realized that we don't need 800 pages of a medical file. Maybe we just need 1 page. So these are all steps. Well, you can't eat an elephant in one day. You have to go about it bit by bit. But we're doing this a lot more aggressively now. The example I gave earlier of the integrated teams seems like an easy solution. I work on a file, I send it over to you, but it might take you 3 to 4 weeks, and it's not really your client. So that operation is all part and part of the procedure. So I've just lost 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and when you do that, well, you can see how long that can take. With integrated units, the person sits beside the other person, says, okay, the decision can be made that same day on the same file. So that just wasn't done beforehand. Clearly, we're facing a challenge. I'm an Acadian. Sometimes the words don't come to me, but there's sometimes a challenge in the type of culture that we have. We've been working on this issue for a few years now. It's a disability program that we're dealing with, so people have to take a very clear-cut approach but we're now more open. If someone is experiencing mental health problems, not just in VAC, but right throughout, when the general public's view of mental health has changed. The culture has changed compared to what it was years ago. Now it's done much more smoothly, and by bringing in new fresh blood, new people, we have training programs, so that we can provide better training to our adjudicators and our case managers. But has there been an improvement? And is it measurable? Can you see that there has been some progress? Yes, measured, observed a concrete example. An adjudicator looked at 1.2 files a day. Now today, we've doubled this. So these are measurable, quantifiable actions, and people are accountable. Thank you very much.
To thank you all for being here. I know there are times that are maybe very difficult, especially when you've mentioned the growth numbers. It's not an enviable position to be in. As I mentioned, having some experience in that environment. But it's our responsibility to make sure our constituents, our taxpayers, and especially veterans are well served, and we get the maximum out of the resources we have. And that's what this committee tries to do time and time again. Thank you for coming and being witnesses this afternoon. Meeting adjourned.